I don't tell this story often, but maybe you need to hear it tonight. The kitchen clock read 9:47 p.m. when my stepfather told me to get out. Not asked, not warned, told. I remember the clock because I kept staring at it, because if I looked at him, I think I might have started crying. And I had decided a long time ago that Dwayne Pritchett was never going to see me cry again. He was standing by the back door, beer in one hand, the other hand pointing at the kitchen mat where I was supposed to leave my house key. Now, Ethan, don't make me say it twice. My mother was at the sink, her back to both of us. The water was running. She wasn't washing anything. She was just letting it run. I think about that sometimes. The sound of that running water, how loud it was, how it filled up the whole kitchen so neither of us had to speak. I was 17 years old. I had a backpack on my shoulder because I had already known. I had known for 3 days, maybe 3 weeks, maybe 3 years. You can feel it coming when a man decides he doesn't want you in his house anymore. It's in the way he doesn't pass the salt at dinner, in the way his eyes skip over you like your furniture. So, my bag was packed. Inside it, I had 2 pairs of jeans, 3 shirts, a toothbrush, a pair of wool socks my grandmother knitted before she died, and a photograph of my father. That photograph was the only thing that mattered. Mom, I said it quiet. I said it like I was apologizing for saying it at all. She didn't turn around. Mom, please. The water kept running. Dwayne stepped between us. Big body, big shadow. He had a way of moving that took up all the air in a room. He smelled like cheap beer and the menthol cigarettes he kept telling her he had quit. She made her choice, boy. That word, boy. He always called me that. Like I didn't have a name. Like I was a dog he hadn't bothered to name yet. Coralie. Now I was begging. I hated myself for it. But I was begging. And my mother who had read me to sleep until I was 9 years old. My mother who had braided 4-leaf clovers into my hair the summer I turned 6. My mother who had cried for 2 full days when my father died 7 years ago and then never cried in front of me again. She turned the water off. She did not turn around. And she said one thing. She said it so soft I almost missed it. I'm sorry, baby. That was it. That was my goodbye. I walked out the back door. Dwayne shut it behind me. I heard the deadbolt slide. The rain hit me before I made it past the porch. Not a drizzle. Not the kind of rain you can walk through and pretend isn't there. The kind of rain that decides things, that picks a side. That night, it picked Dwayne's. My hoodie was soaked in under a minute. I stood on the porch for a long time. Maybe 2 minutes, maybe 10. I kept waiting for the door to open, for her to come out, for her to say there'd been a mistake, for her to grab my arm and pull me back inside and tell that man he was the one who had to leave. The door didn't open. It just sat there, wet, closed, done. So I walked down the gravel driveway, past the mailbox with our family name still painted on the side in my mother's careful handwriting. Caldwell. She'd painted it the year before I started kindergarten. My father had held the ladder. I almost touched the mailbox as I walked past it. I didn't, because that name didn't feel like mine anymore. I walked along the county road. The shoulder was loose gravel and broken bottles. Trucks passed every few minutes. None of them slowed down. Why would they? A skinny kid in a soaked hoodie walking out of nowhere toward nowhere. I had $9 in my pocket. 9. Not 10. Not enough for a motel room. Not enough for a bus ticket. Not enough for anything except maybe a hot meal somewhere if I was lucky enough to find a diner still open. Because that's all I was thinking about right then. A hot meal, a roof, anywhere that wasn't a wet road in March in the Appalachian foothills. I walked for 2 miles. My fingers went numb first, then my ears, then the back of my neck. There's a moment when you're cold enough, when your body forgets how to be afraid. It just shuts down. The fear leaves. The shaking starts. And in the middle of the shaking, your brain goes very, very still. That's where I was when I saw the lights. A gas station, off the highway, maybe a quarter mile down a side road. The sign was half busted out. Harlan's Fuel and Grocery. But the light inside was yellow and warm, and I could see a coffee pot through the window. I started walking faster, and that's when I saw it. Parked behind the gas station, tucked between two dumpsters, half hidden by overgrown weeds, an RV, or what used to be an RV. Rusted down to the wheel wells, one window cracked. The paint job peeling so badly you couldn't tell what color it had been originally. Maybe cream, maybe gray. Maybe something hopeful once. Taped to the door was a piece of cardboard, handwritten, black marker, letters slanting downhill. For sale, $10. See inside. I stopped walking. I stood there in the rain. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because I didn't know what else to do. I had $9. It was 10. But I stood there and I looked at that broken down RV like it had been waiting for me. Like it was the only thing in the whole wide, rotten world that hadn't yet told me to leave. I walked into the gas station. A bell jingled when I opened the door. Real bell. The kind they don't make anymore. The warmth hit me like a wall. My glasses fogged. My fingers started to thaw, and that hurt almost as much as being cold. There was an old man at the counter. He was reading some paperback novel cover bent backwards. He didn't look up right away. He just turned the page. I stood there dripping rainwater all over his linoleum. The RV. My voice came out smaller than I wanted. He turned the page again. The RV out back. Is it really $10? He set the book down. He looked at me. He was maybe 65. Flannel shirt. Salt and pepper beard, mostly salt. Eyes the color of an old penny. Tired eyes. Kind eyes. Eyes that had watched a lot of weather come through that window. He didn't smile, but he didn't frown either. He just looked at me for a long time, long enough that I started to get embarrassed. I can pay, I said, too fast, too eager. I have it, the 10. I can pay. That was a lie. He raised one eyebrow. Son, can you show me what's in your pocket? My face went hot. I took out my wallet, folded it open. 2 5s. No. 1 5 and 4 1s. I counted again. $9. I felt my throat close up. I'm sorry. I thought I had 10. I'm sorry. I started to back toward the door. Hold on. He came out from behind the counter. He moved slow, like a man whose knees had stopped being kind to him a few years back. He stopped in front of me. He looked at my face, then at the wet bag on my shoulder, then at my soaked tennis shoes. He said one word. Walter! I blinked. That's my name. Walter Hayes. Oh, I swallowed. Ethan. Ethan what? I almost said it. I almost said Caldwell, but something stopped me. I don't know what. Some instinct from a place I didn't know I had. I said just Ethan. Walter Hayes nodded, like that was the right answer, like that was the answer he'd been waiting for. $9'll do, Ethan. I stared at him. The RV. $9'll do. But the sign says. I know what the sign says. I wrote the sign. $9'll do. He held out his hand. I gave him every last dollar I had in the world. He took it. He put it in his shirt pocket without looking at it. And then he reached behind the counter and pulled out a key on a brass ring. It runs, sort of. Battery's weak. Heater works if you give it a minute. Don't push the brake too hard. It pulls left. Okay. There's a blanket in the cab, wool one. Take it. Okay. He handed me the key. And then he did something I didn't expect. He held on to my hand, just for a second. Just long enough for me to feel how warm his palm was against my cold fingers. He looked at me, and he said, There's a door inside, in the back. It's locked. Don't break it open yet. Not until you're ready. I felt my throat close again. Ready for what? He let go of my hand. He walked back behind the counter. He picked up his paperback book. He turned the page. You'll know. I stood there for a second, maybe 2. Waiting for him to say something else, to explain. He didn't, so I walked out into the rain, and I walked around to the back of the gas station, and I climbed inside the RV that I now owned. the only thing in the whole world that belonged to me. The door creaked when it shut. The smell hit me first. Dust, old upholstery, a little bit of motor oil, a little bit of something else, something I couldn't name, something that smelled almost like wood smoke, almost like a person. I dropped my backpack on the seat by the door. The inside was worse than the outside, or maybe better. I couldn't decide. The kitchenette was tiny. 2-burner stove, a little sink, a fridge that I knew without opening would not be working. The cabinets had doors that hung crooked. One of them was missing entirely. Inside, that one somebody had scratched a date into the wood. November 4th, 91. I don't know why, I'll never know why, but I touched the numbers with my finger like they meant something. There was a couch along one wall, plaid, the kind your grandmother had a long time ago. One of the cushions was sunken in the middle like somebody had spent a lot of years sitting there. There was a small fold-down table. There was a Polaroid stuck to the wall with yellowed Scotch tape. The picture was so faded I couldn't make out who was in it. I walked deeper inside, past the couch, past the table, through a narrow hallway that smelled even more strongly of that wood smoke person smell. And there at the end of the hallway, just like Walter had said, a door that did not match the rest of the RV, because the rest of the RV was wood paneling and cheap aluminum trim. This door was metal, heavy, painted black, with a small keyhole in the middle and no handle at all, just scratches around the lock, like somebody at some point had tried very hard to get it open and failed. I stood in front of it. I put my hand on it. The metal was cold. Not cold like the rain outside, cold in a way that made the hair stand up on my arms. I almost tried to pry it open right then. I almost picked up the first heavy thing I could find and started swinging. But I heard Walter's voice in my head. Not until you're ready. So I stepped back. I turned around. I walked back to the front of the RV. I sat down on the plaid couch. And for the first time since my mother turned the water on in the kitchen sink, I let myself breathe. I breathed all the way in. I breathed all the way out. I unzipped my backpack. I took out the photograph. My father in a green flannel shirt, standing on the porch of the house I'd grown up in, holding me on his hip. I was maybe 4. He was maybe in his late 30s. He had a mustache then. He had the mustache his whole life. I used to laugh at him when he shaved over the sink because his upper lip looked naked without it. He was smiling. He always smiled in pictures. Real smile. The kind that crinkled his eyes. Nathaniel Caldwell. My father. Dead 7 years, killed on a logging road in the mountains. His truck went off the curve at Devil's Elbow. That's what the sheriff told us. Brakes failed. Wet pavement. Nobody's fault. I was 10 when they told me. I was 10 when my mother folded up his green flannel shirt and put it in a box at the top of her closet. I was 10 when my mother stopped braiding clovers into my hair. I held the photograph in both hands. I whispered the only thing I could think of to whisper. Dad, I'm in a lot of trouble. He smiled back at me from the porch. He didn't answer. He couldn't. I fell asleep on the plaid couch sometime around 2 in the morning. I don't remember falling asleep. I just remember waking up and being surprised that I had. It was barely light out. The rain had stopped. I could hear birds. Birds. After a night like that, as if nothing had happened. I sat up. My back hurt. My neck hurt. My stomach was a tight knot of nothing because I hadn't eaten since lunch the day before. The RV was cold but dry. I had not died in the night. I felt 17 and hungry and scared and small. I rolled the wool blanket up. I splashed some bottled water from my bag onto my face. I checked my reflection in the cracked side mirror by the door. The boy who looked back at me had circles under his eyes that he was too young to have. Okay, I said to him. He didn't look convinced. I pulled my hood up and I stepped outside. The town in daylight was different, less mean. The wet streets shone like dimes. A flag was flapping on a pole outside the post office. Somewhere a school bus was groaning up a hill. I walked. I didn't have a plan. I just walked. I needed food. I needed money. I needed work. I needed to figure out somehow in the next 6 hours how to be a person who could feed himself. Most of the shops weren't open yet. The hardware store, the barber, the little used bookstore with the cat in the window. All dark, all locked. But 2 blocks down on the corner where Maple met Pine, there was a window with steam on it and a sign painted in green letters across the glass. Maggie's Counter. Breakfast all day. I stopped. I could smell bacon from the sidewalk. I almost cried right there. I don't know how to explain to you what bacon smells like to a person who has not eaten in 17 hours. It is not the smell of breakfast. It is the smell of mercy. I went inside. The bell over the door rang. It was the same kind of bell as the one at Walter's gas station, the kind they don't make anymore. The whole town, I would learn, was held together by bells that don't get made anymore. The diner was warm, yellow lights, 6 booths along one wall, a counter with 8 stools, a tin ceiling with the paint peeling in one corner. A woman behind the counter looked up. She was somewhere around 68. Maybe 70, hair white, pinned back with 2 bobby pins, apron the color of mint leaves. Her face had laugh lines so deep they were practically grooves in the skin around her eyes. She was holding a coffee pot. She stopped. She looked at me. She looked at me for a long time, the same way Walter had, like she was reading something I didn't know was written on me. Then she set the coffee pot down on the warmer. "Sit, child." I didn't move. "Sit." And to the counter next to the window. I walked over. I sat where she'd pointed. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I don't have any." "I didn't ask you for any. I told you to sit." She poured me a coffee. She set it in front of me. "Drink that. Slow. 2 sugars. You take cream." Yes, ma'am." "Good answer." She handed me a little metal pitcher. I poured. I drank. I had never in my whole 17 years on this earth tasted coffee like that. Not at home. Not at the gas station where I used to buy bottled drinks after school. That coffee in Maggie's diner that morning. It was a sermon in a mug. She watched me drink it. She didn't smile. She said, "Eggs or pancakes?" "Ma'am, I really can't." "Eggs or pancakes, child? Pick one." I looked at the counter. I said pancakes. Her eyes did something then. A flicker, like maybe she'd been hoping I'd say pancakes. Or maybe like she'd been hoping I'd say it just like that. Quiet. Like I was used to asking for things and not getting them. She walked back to the kitchen. I drank my coffee. I watched the street outside. 5 minutes later, she set a plate down in front of me. 3 pancakes. A pat of butter melting on top. A small pitcher of warm syrup beside it. And bacon. 3 strips. Crisp. "Ma'am, eat." I ate. I tried to eat slow. I tried to be polite. I tried to remember everything my mother had ever taught me about being a guest at someone else's table. I failed. I ate like a wolf. When the plate was clean, I sat there feeling shame burn in my chest. She came back. She refilled my coffee. She said, "What's your name?" "Ethan." "Ethan what?" I almost lied, but there was something about her, something that wouldn't let me lie. "Ethan Caldwell." The coffee pot stopped pouring, just for a heartbeat, just long enough that I noticed. Then she finished pouring. She set the pot back on the warmer. She wiped her hands on her apron. She said, "All right then, Ethan Caldwell. You ever wash dishes?" "Yes, ma'am." "You any good at it?" "My mother said I was." "Mothers usually do." She walked around the counter. She stopped beside my stool. "There's an apron on the hook by the kitchen door. There's a sink behind it that hasn't been emptied since yesterday lunch. You give me 4 good hours, I give you $20 and lunch. We have a deal." I stared at her. "Ma'am." "Yes, ma'am." "Stand up." I stood up. She looked at me. She put one hand on my shoulder. Light. Just for a second. She said, "You got somewhere to sleep tonight, child." I didn't trust my voice. I just nodded. She looked at me a second longer. She knew I was lying. She didn't push. She said, "Apron's by the door." I worked 4 hours. I worked harder than I'd ever worked in my life. I scrubbed every dish in that sink. I bussed every table. I mopped the floor under the booths. I cleaned the bathroom in the back, which I will tell you honestly, no one had cleaned in a long time. She fed me a grilled cheese sandwich at noon. She fed me a bowl of tomato soup with it. She handed me a $20 bill at 1 in the afternoon. When she handed me the money, she didn't let go right away. She said, "Tomorrow morning, same time." I blinked. Tomorrow. You want the work or not, Ethan Caldwell? I want it. Then I'll see you tomorrow. I walked out of that diner with $20 in my pocket and a stomach full of grilled cheese and tomato soup, and I did not understand. I did not understand any of it. A woman I had never met, who I had nothing to offer, who had no reason in the world to be kind to me, had been kinder to me in 4 hours than my own house had been in years. I bought groceries. I bought peanut butter and bread and apples and a jug of water. I bought a flashlight and 2D batteries. I bought a candle and a box of matches. I had $4 left. I went back to the RV. I unloaded everything onto the little fold-down table. I lit the candle. I sat on the plaid couch and I ate an apple and I tried to feel grateful, and instead I felt the loneliest I had ever felt in my whole life. That was when I noticed it. The cabinet across from the couch, the bottom one, with the broken door. It was hanging open about an inch. I thought maybe a draft had opened it. I thought maybe a mouse had been in there. I crossed the RV. I knelt down on the floor in front of it. I opened the cabinet. Inside, all the way at the back, behind a coil of old rope and a folded green tarp, was a box. A wooden box, maybe the size of a hardcover novel, stained dark, brass clasps on the front, the kind of box you might keep cigars in, or letters or pictures you don't want to look at very often. It was tied shut with a length of twine. The twine had been retied many times. You could see the faded marks where it had been wrapped. I sat back on my heels. I looked at the box. I almost put it back. I almost shoved the rope and the tarp back in front of it and closed the cabinet and pretended I had never seen it. Because something in me knew, some animal part of my brain knew, that if I opened that box, I was not going to be able to close it again. But I had nothing left to lose. I had no home. I had no mother. I had no father. I had a candle and an apple and a wool blanket and a locked door behind me that I had been told not to open. I had nothing left to lose. So I pulled the box out. I set it on the fold-down table. I untied the twine. I lifted the lid. The first thing on top was a piece of paper folded in thirds, yellowed at the edges, the kind of yellow that paper gets when it's been folded for a long time and waited a long time. I unfolded it carefully. It was a copy of a receipt, lumber and finishing nails, years old, signed for. At the bottom, the signature was my father's, Nathaniel Caldwell. His handwriting, his curve on the N, his little slant on the C. I sat very still. I unfolded the next paper, another receipt, a bill of materials, then a contract, then another, page after page, receipt after receipt. Contract after contract, all signed by him, all in his handwriting, all from places I had never heard him speak of. I started laying them out on the table in rows. My hands were shaking, and I couldn't make them stop. Why was all of this here? Why was my father's name? My father who built bookshelves on weekends. My father who took me fishing at Tucker Lake when I was 8. My father who died on a logging road 7 years ago. Why was all of his paperwork in a wooden box, in a broken RV, behind a gas station, 60 miles from the house I grew up in? And then, underneath the last receipt, there was a photograph. I picked it up. It was a 4x6 print, the kind they use to give you in an envelope at the drugstore. 3 men were standing in front of a half-built structure. Looked like a barn, or maybe a workshop. Big timbers, sawdust on their boots. The man on the left was in a dark suit, out of place against the lumber. He was smiling, white teeth, slick black hair. A man who knew he looked good and knew the camera knew it too. The man on the right was in flannel and work boots. He had a tape measure clipped to his belt. He had a mustache. He was my father. A younger version, but the same crinkly eyes, the same easy smile, and the man in the middle, the third man, was holding a coffee thermos, wearing a flannel shirt, a little younger than the man I had met at the gas station the night before, but not so much younger that I couldn't tell. It was Walter Hayes. I let go of the photograph. It fluttered down to the table. I sat there in the candlelight, in the dark RV, with the broken cabinet open behind me, with my dead father's signature scattered across the fold-down table, with the photograph of my dead father standing next to the old man who had sold me this RV for $9. I sat there for a long time. I didn't move. I didn't breathe right. My mind was very loud and very quiet at the same time. He knew. Walter Hayes knew. He knew my father. He had known my father. He had stood next to my father in flannel and boots in front of a half-built barn with sawdust on his shoes a long time ago, and he had not said one word about it. He had sold me an RV for $9. He had told me there was a locked door in the back. He had told me not to open it yet. I thought about the way he had held my hand just for a second, just long enough to feel how warm his palm was against my cold fingers. I thought about the way Maggie had looked at me when I said my last name, the way the coffee pot had stopped pouring, just for a heartbeat, just long enough that I had noticed. I thought about my father in the green flannel shirt, holding me on his hip, smiling that crinkly smile. I thought about my mother turning off the kitchen sink and saying, "I'm sorry, baby," without ever turning around. I thought about the locked door at the end of the hallway, the one with no handle. I thought, there is a moment in a young man's life when he realizes he does not know his own father, when he realizes that the man he thought he buried at age 10 was not the whole man, was not even most of the man, was a story his mother had been telling him for 7 years to keep him from asking the questions she did not want to answer. That moment is colder than rain in March. I sat in the dark RV. I picked the photograph back up. I looked at my father's face. I looked at Walter's face. I said it out loud to no one, to the candle, to the man in the flannel shirt holding the coffee thermos. I said, "Who were you?" The candle flame moved. The RV was very, very quiet. And somewhere behind me down the narrow hallway was a locked metal door, cold to the touch, with no handle on it, and scratches around the keyhole where someone a long time ago had tried very hard to get it open and failed. I did not sleep that night either. I sat at the fold-down table with the candle burning down. I laid out every piece of paper from that wooden box. I read every signature. I held the photograph up to the candlelight, and I memorized every face. The man in the dark suit, the one with the slick black hair. I did not know him, but I had a feeling. I was going to. I blew out the candle just before dawn. I lay down on the plaid couch. I closed my eyes. I did not cry. I had told myself a long time ago that Dwayne Pritchett was never going to see me cry again. I had not told myself anything about Walter Hayes, and in the dark of that RV, with the rain finally finished and the birds about to start and the photograph of my dead father lying on the table beside me, I let myself cry, just a little, just for him, and then I slept. I woke up to somebody knocking on the side of the RV. Not loud, not angry, just 3 slow taps, like a person who didn't want to scare me. I sat up so fast I hit my head on the cabinet. The sun was already up. I could see it slanting through the cracked window over the kitchenette, yellow, honey-colored, the kind of light that comes after a hard rain. The papers were still on the table. The photograph was still face up. My father was still smiling at me from a sawmill yard years ago. 3 taps again. I scrambled to gather the papers. I shoved them back in the wooden box. I closed the lid. I pushed the box under the couch. I had a panic moment about the photograph and finally just shoved it into my hoodie pocket. Then I opened the door. Walter Hayes was standing in the gravel. He had 2 paper cups of coffee in his hands. He looked up at me. He said, "Morning, son." I didn't say anything. He held one of the cups out. I didn't take it. He nodded. He set the cup down on the bottom step of the RV. Real gentle, like it was a wild animal he didn't want to spook. Maggie said you put away 3 pancakes yesterday. I figured coffee was a safer bet. I still didn't say anything. He looked at me a long time. His eyes did that thing again, that reading thing. He said, "You found something." Not a question. I felt my throat close up. "It wasn't a question, Ethan. I have to go to work." I said it too fast. I said it like a kid who'd been caught. "Maggie doesn't need you till 9. It's 7:15. "How do you know what Maggie needs?" He almost smiled. Almost. "Because I've known Maggie a long time." "Sit down, son. Drink your coffee." I didn't sit down. I stood in the doorway of the RV and I looked at this man who had held my hand for 1 second longer than a stranger should. This man whose face was in a photograph in my pocket, standing next to my dead father. I said, "Who was he to you?" Walter took a slow sip of his own coffee. He looked at me over the rim of the cup. He said, "He was my brother." The world went quiet. I mean that. The birds, the wind, the hum of the gas station compressor, all of it went away. My brother, your father, Nathaniel Caldwell, was my brother. I took 1 step back into the RV. I put my hand on the door frame to steady myself. I said, "No. Ethan, no. My father didn't have a brother. He grew up an only child. My grandmother told me 100 times. He was an only child." Walter set his coffee down on the step next to mine. He put both hands in his jacket pockets. He said, "Your grandmother told you what your father asked her to tell you." "Why would he?" "Because of the man in the suit, in the photograph, in the box, under your couch." I stared at him. He had not been inside the RV. He had not seen me take the box out. He had not seen me lay the papers across the table. He just knew. I sat down on the top step of the RV. My legs would not hold me anymore. Walter sat down on the second step. We sat there like that, an old man and a 17-year-old boy, with 2 paper cups of coffee between us, and the sun coming up over the broken sign that said Harlan's Fuel and Grocery. He said, "I should have told you the first night. I almost did." "Then why didn't you?" "Because you needed sleep. And food, and one night where nothing else got taken from you." I picked up the coffee. I held it in my hands. I let it warm my fingers. I said, "Tell me now." He told me. He told me slow. He told me with the kind of voice a man uses when he has been waiting to tell a story for a very long time and is afraid he won't get it right. He told me my father was named Nathaniel Caldwell, that he, Walter, was 4 years younger, that they had grown up in a little gray house outside of a mountain town, that their mother, my grandmother, had been a hard woman who loved her sons in a way that did not include touching them very much. He told me my father had been the careful one, the quiet one, the one who could sit for 2 hours fixing the same broken hinge. He told me my father had been a Finnish carpenter for over 20 years. That he was good, the best in 3 counties. He told me that some years ago my father had taken a contract with a man named Victor Marsh. "Victor Marsh," I said. "You don't know that name yet. You will." He kept going. He told me Victor Marsh had a development company, a real estate operation. Marsh built strip malls and storage units, and for one summer, a half-finished hunting lodge on a property up in the Hollows. My father had been the lead carpenter on that lodge. "That's the picture in your pocket, Ethan." I touched my hoodie. The photograph crinkled. "Your dad, me, Marsh, the day they poured the foundation." He told me about the hunting lodge. He told me how it had been going up fast and clean, and then how halfway through that summer my father had started coming home quieter than usual. He'd been seeing things on that job site. What things? Men coming and going at night. Cars Marsh shouldn't have known. Briefcases changing hands. Why was he there at night? He was finishing a built-in for the office he was trying to get done. He'd lost a week to rain in May. He was making up time. He told me my father had started keeping a notebook, dates, license plates, the names of men he overheard. He was scared, Ethan. He didn't tell your mother. He told me. He drove out to my place on a Tuesday night, and he sat on my porch, and he said, Walter, I think these men are buying off the county. He said, Walter, I think I'm going to have to talk to somebody. Walter took a long breath. 2 weeks after that night on my porch, your father's truck went off the road at Devil's Elbow. I closed my eyes. I held the coffee very tight. The sheriff at the time was a man named Earl Brody. Earl Brody worked for Victor Marsh. Whole county knew it, but couldn't prove it. Earl wrote up the accident report in one afternoon and closed the file. Walter, I tried, Ethan. I tried to get somebody to listen. I drove up to the state police barracks. I called a reporter at a paper out west. I called twice. What happened? What happened is 2 weeks later, somebody put a brick through my truck window with a note around it. What did the note say? He looked at me. It said, Little brother. I felt the apple from yesterday come up halfway in my throat. I made it go back down. He told me he had left. He had sold his house at a loss. He had moved across 2 state lines to a town nobody had heard of, and he had stopped being Walter Caldwell and started being Walter Hayes. He had taken his mother's maiden name. He had not contacted my mother. He had not contacted me. He had not contacted anyone. Why? Because Marsh was watching your mother, and he was watching you. And as long as you all looked like you didn't know anything, you were safe. For how long? Until you turned 18, Ethan. That was the plan? Whose plan? Your father's. I dropped the coffee. It fell off the step, and the lid popped off, and it spilled into the gravel in a long brown river. Walter didn't move. He said, Your father knew. He knew if anything happened to him, Marsh would put somebody close to your mother. To watch. To control. He knew it before it happened. He left me a letter, telling me what to do. I could not get a full breath. Why an RV, Walter? Why a stupid RV behind a gas station? He looked down at his hands. Because I needed a place to put what your father left you, where it wouldn't be in a house that could be searched, where it wouldn't be in a bank that could be subpoenaed, where it wouldn't be in my name, or yours, or anybody's. I bought this RV a few years after your dad passed. I parked it back here the year after that. Harlan, the man who owned this station, he was a friend. He let me keep it. He let me put up the sign. He let me wait. Wait for what? For you to come find it. I stared at him. You can't have known I'd find it. No, I couldn't. But I knew that boy. That boy you used to be. The one who climbed the apple tree behind your mother's house and broke his arm and didn't cry because his daddy had told him not to. I knew that boy was going to get to a place one day where he had nowhere else to go. And I knew that boy would walk far enough to find me. You watched me. From a distance. Once or twice a year, I would drive through town. I would park outside the high school. I would see you walking out with your friends. I would drive away. I put my face in my hands. I sat there on the step of the RV with my face in my hands, and I tried very hard to hold what I was feeling, to keep it small enough that I could carry it. Walter said very quiet, I almost came for you twice. Why didn't you? Because your mother was alive. And she still had you, and I'd promised your father I would not interfere unless I had to, so I waited. And then Maggie called me a few months back and said your mother's new husband had blacked your eye in the parking lot of the grocery store. I lifted my head. Maggie has been my eyes in this town for a long time, Ethan. I think that's the moment I understood. The whole town, not just Walter, not just Maggie. There was a network of people, a net of old people, spread out across a few zip codes. Who had been watching for me? Who had been waiting? Who had been ready? Walter was looking at me very carefully. He said, I am not asking you to forgive me, son. I am asking you to listen, and then to decide. I wiped my nose on my sleeve. I said, there's a door. Yes. At the back of the RV. Yes. You said don't open it until I'm ready. Yes. Walter, am I ready? He looked at me for a long time. He said, I think so. I didn't open it that morning. I went to work first. That's what Maggie wanted. I knew it without her saying. So I walked the 4 blocks to the diner with Walter walking beside me. He didn't say anything else on the walk. He let me be. When we got to the diner, he stopped at the door. He said, I'll be there when you come back. Bring the box. Where will you be? In the RV, waiting. I went inside. Maggie looked up from the counter. She did not look surprised to see me. She did not look surprised to see Walter through the window walking away down the sidewalk. She just said, apron's on the hook. I tied the apron. I started the dishes. Maggie cooked behind me. I could hear her humming. Something old, something church-shaped. After an hour, she set a coffee down beside me on the dish station. She said, He told you. He told me. Are you all right? No, ma'am. She put her hand on my back, just for a second, just like she'd put her hand on my shoulder yesterday. She said, Drink your coffee, child. The bell rang over the door. A girl walked in. She was about my age, maybe a year younger, dark hair pulled back in a quick braid, faded jeans, a jean jacket, boots that had seen some weather. Maggie looked up. Maggie's whole face changed. Hazel. The girl smiled. Hi, Graham. I froze with a plate in my hand. Maggie said, Hazel, this is Ethan. Ethan, this is my granddaughter Hazel. She comes in to help me weekends and any morning she's not at the community college. Hazel looked at me. I looked at Hazel. She had her grandmother's laugh lines around her eyes, even at 17. She said, Hey. I said, Hey. That was it. That was our whole first conversation. Hey and hey. She took an apron off the hook. She tied it. She walked behind the counter like she had been walking behind that counter her whole life. She started restocking the napkin holders. I went back to the dishes. I was bad at dishes for the next 10 minutes because every 2 minutes, Hazel would walk past with a bus tub, and every 2 minutes, my brain would announce very loud, that is a girl your age, and she has a kind face, and you are filthy, and you smell like an RV. I tried to ignore my brain. My brain did not cooperate. She passed me once with a stack of plates. She paused. She said, Graham said your name's Ethan Caldwell. Yeah. You any kin to a Nathaniel Caldwell. The plate I was holding almost slipped. I caught it. I said, he was my dad. Her face did something then. It got soft, real fast. She said, Your dad built our kitchen table. I stopped washing. I just stood there with my hands in soapy water. She said, I was little. I remember him. He let me hold the sandpaper. I didn't know what to say. She said, he had a mustache, right? I laughed. It came out of me before I could stop it. I said, he did. He had a mustache. She smiled. She walked back into the kitchen. I stood there with my hands in the water for a minute longer than I should have. I worked until 2 o'clock. Maggie paid me cash again. $25 this time. She wouldn't say why it was more. She said, Hazel will walk you back. That's not. Hazel is walking you back. So Hazel walked me back. We walked the 4 blocks to the gas station. We didn't say much. She said, Graham likes you. How do you know? Because she paid you $25. That means something. It means she likes you. I almost laughed again. I was doing a lot of almost laughing around Hazel, and I noticed it. She said, she told me a little about your dad, about your situation. I felt my face go hot. She said, I'm not asking, I'm just saying. I know a little. Okay. She kept walking. After about a block, she said, you ever feel like the town's been waiting for you? I stopped walking. She stopped too. I said, yeah, I feel like that exactly. She nodded, like that confirmed something she had been thinking for a while. She said, me too, and I grew up here. We started walking again. She walked me to the gas station. She didn't go in. She just nodded at the RV. She said, don't get murdered. I blinked. She grinned. It's a joke. Graham says you live in a rusted-out RV behind a gas station. That's a horror movie setup. It's actually pretty cozy. Mm-hmm. Tell your ghost I said hi." She walked away. I stood there a second longer than I needed to. I went around to the back. Walter was sitting on the step of the RV. He had the wooden box on his knees. He looked up. He said, "You ready?" I said yes. We went inside. I closed the door behind us. The light was different in the afternoon. Less honey, more gray. The plaid couch looked tired. The fold-down table looked tired. The whole RV looked tired. Walter set the wooden box on the table. He didn't open it. He said, "Behind the door at the back, there is a small compartment. Your father built it. He built it himself. The lock is original. There is a key." He reached into his shirt pocket. He pulled out something tied to a red string, a small brass key. He held it out. "I have carried this for a long time, son." I took it. The metal was warm from his pocket. He said, "I'm going to wait out front. I think this is a thing you do alone." He stepped past me. He opened the door of the RV. He stepped down into the gravel. He closed the door very softly behind him. I stood alone in the RV. I held the key. I walked down the narrow hallway. The locked metal door was right where it had been. Cold, heavy, painted black, with scratches around the keyhole where somebody had once tried very hard to get in and failed. I knelt down. I put the key in the lock. It went in like it had been made for it. Because it had been, I turned it. It clicked. The door swung open. It did not creak. It did not groan. It just opened. Smooth. Inside was a small compartment, maybe 3 feet deep, maybe 4 feet wide. The walls were lined with cedar. Cedar. He had cedar-lined a smuggler's compartment in a junk RV, because that was the kind of carpenter he was. On the floor of the compartment was a leather journal, black, cracked along the spine, a rubber band holding it together. On top of the journal was a small spiral notebook, the kind a high school kid would carry to class, faded blue cover, and on top of the notebook was a sealed white envelope, 3 words written across the front, in my father's handwriting, "For my son." I sat down on the floor of the hallway. I picked up the envelope. I held it for a long time before I opened it. When I finally tore it open, carefully, trying not to rip the writing, a single sheet of lined notebook paper fell out into my lap. I unfolded it. I read, "Ethan, if you're reading this, then I didn't make it back. And I'm sorry, son. I am so sorry. I want to say this first, before anything, before any of the other words on this page. I love you. I love you more than my whole life. I love you more than I knew how to say out loud when I was alive. I should have said it more. I should have said it every morning. I should have said it instead of drive safe. And instead of did you finish your homework, and instead of all the other things I said, I should have just said I love you, over and over, until you got sick of it. If you're reading this, you've already met Walter. He is my brother. He is your uncle. I know you didn't know. There were reasons. The man you're going to learn about is named Victor Marsh. He is dangerous. He has friends in this county who are also dangerous. Do not go to anyone you don't know. Do not go to the sheriff. Sheriff Brody is one of them. There is one man in this county who is not. His name is Frank Donovan. He works in the next county over now. Walter knows where to find him. In the blue notebook, you'll find what I saw. License plates, names, dates, times. I tried to be careful. I tried to be sure. I hope it's enough. In the leather journal, you'll find names. 3 of them are county officials. 1 of them is the mayor. I want you to be very careful about that journal. If it gets to the wrong hands, it disappears. If it gets to the right hands, it changes things. Ethan, a man is not the things he owns. A man is not the things he is afraid of. A man is the things he is willing to stand up and say out loud, even when his hands are shaking, even when his voice is small. Stand up, son, when you're ready, when Walter says you're ready, not before. And one more thing. Your mother, she doesn't know what I knew. She doesn't know about Marsh. She doesn't know about any of it. I kept it from her because I loved her and I didn't want her to be afraid. I want you to understand, whatever has happened in the years since I've been gone, whatever she has done, whatever she has failed to do, your mother loved you. Your mother loves you. Be gentle with her, Ethan. She has been carrying a weight she doesn't know the name of. I love you, Dad. I read the letter twice. I read it 3 times. I read the line about my mother 5 times. I sat on the floor of the hallway of a rusted-out RV behind a gas station in a town I was barely from, with my dead father's handwriting in my hands. And I let myself cry in a way I had not cried since I was 10 years old. I cried for the years. I cried for the mustache. I cried for the sandpaper my father had handed to a little girl named Hazel. I cried for my mother standing at the kitchen sink with the water running, who it turned out had not been turning her back on me at all, who had been turning her back so I wouldn't see her face, because she had nothing left in her face to give. I sat there a long time. When I came back out of the RV, the sun was going down. The gravel was orange. Walter was leaning on the back wall of the gas station smoking a cigarette. I hadn't seen him light. He turned when he heard me come down the steps. He looked at my face. He didn't say anything. He just nodded. He said, "Frank Donovan." I said, "Frank Donovan. Tomorrow. Tomorrow." I went back to the RV that night. I read the blue notebook by candlelight. My father's handwriting, license plates, dates, times, the men he had seen, the cars they had driven, the places they had met. The county courthouse twice, the Marsh Holdings office 4 times, a diner outside of town. I read until my eyes hurt. I slept on the plaid couch. I dreamed of my father. He was holding a piece of sandpaper. He was handing it to a little girl with dark hair. He was saying, "Go on, try." The next morning, I went to see my mother. I did not tell Walter. I did not tell Maggie. I did not tell anyone. I walked. It took me almost 4 hours. By the time I crossed our property line, my feet were blistered. I didn't go to the front door. I went around through the side yard. I crouched down behind the row of hydrangeas my mother had planted the spring before my father died. I waited. I could see her through the kitchen window. She was sitting at the kitchen table. She was not at the sink. She was at the table. She had a photograph in her hands. I could not see which one, but I could see her shoulders shaking. She was crying. She was crying the way a person cries when she is sure she is alone in the house, with her whole body, with her whole face. I watched her for a long time. Dwayne was not home. The truck was gone. She was alone in our kitchen, crying at the kitchen table. I almost went in. I almost stood up and walked across the lawn and pushed open the back door and said, "Mama." I almost did, but I remembered my father's letter. Be gentle with her. She has been carrying a weight she doesn't know the name of. So I sat behind the hydrangeas, and I watched my mother cry. And I understood for the first time that she had been crying like this for 7 years. In an empty kitchen, at a table she could not leave, with a man in her house who watched her every move. That my mother had not chosen Dwayne Pritchett. That my mother had been delivered to Dwayne Pritchett by a man named Victor Marsh, who had needed eyes inside our house. I sat behind the hydrangeas for almost an hour. I did not let her see me. When the sun started to go down, I crawled back through the yard. I walked back along the road, the whole 4 hours. I cried twice on the walk. I dried my face before I got to town. I came back into the gas station lot just after dark. Walter was standing in the door of the RV. He had been worried. I could see it. He didn't ask where I'd been. He said, "There's somebody here to see you." I stepped inside. A man was sitting at the fold-down table. Late 50s, maybe 60, gray hair, gray mustache, wearing a sheriff's department jacket. He stood up when I came in. His eyes were brown, tired, kind. He looked at me. He looked at me like a man looking at the son of a friend he had not been able to save. He stuck out his hand. He said, "Frank Donovan, your daddy was the best man I knew." I shook his hand. I said, "I have something he wanted me to give you." I went to the back of the RV. I came back with the leather journal. the blue notebook, the wooden box of receipts. I set them all on the table. Frank Donovan looked down at them. He took his hat off. He set it on the table beside the journal. He sat down very slowly. He opened the journal. He read for 30 seconds. He let out a long breath, the kind of breath a man holds for years. He said very quiet, "All right. All right then, Nate. All right." He looked up at me. He said, "Son, I'm going to need you to be brave. For a little while. Can you do that?" I thought about the kitchen window. I thought about my mother's shoulders shaking. I thought about the sound of the back door deadbolting behind me 3 nights ago. I thought about my father's mustache. I said, "Yes, sir." Frank Donovan nodded. He stood up. He picked up the journal, the notebook, the box. He walked out of the RV with all of it. Walter and I stood in the doorway and watched him drive away. We didn't say anything for a long time. Then Walter said, "It begins now, son." I said, "I know." I went back inside. I sat down at the table where my father's papers had been. The table was empty for the first time since I had opened the wooden box. But the photograph was still in my hoodie pocket. I took it out. My father, Walter, Victor Marsh, a half-built lodge years ago, sawdust on the boots. I set the photograph in the middle of the empty table. I looked at it for a long time, and out loud to the man in the green flannel shirt, to the brother I had not known, to the granddaughter of a stranger who had handed me a coffee with 2 sugars, to the cop who had carried a man's name in his pocket for years. I said, "Okay, Dad, I'm ready." And outside the RV, the night was very dark and very still, and somewhere in that town, a man named Victor Marsh was eating dinner in a house that he did not know was about to fall. Frank Donovan came back 2 days later. He came at dawn, before the gas station opened, before Maggie unlocked the diner, before the birds were really sure it was morning. He knocked on the RV door. I was already up. I had not slept much since I'd handed him the journal. I opened the door in my socks. He didn't smile. Frank didn't really smile, but he nodded. He said, "We have a problem." I felt my stomach drop. He said, "Marsh knows." "How?" "Doesn't matter how. He knows. Somebody talked. Somebody always talks. We've got maybe 48 hours before he moves on something." "Moves on what?" Frank looked at me a long second. He said, "On you." I sat down on the top step. Frank crouched in the gravel so his face was level with mine. He said, "Listen to me, son. I have called the state police. I have a friend at the bureau. I have a reporter on her way. I have wheels turning, but wheels take time, and Marsh is not going to give us time." "What do you need me to do?" "I need you to disappear for 48 hours. "To where?" "Maggie's. The upstairs apartment, above the diner." "What about Walter?" "Walter stays with you." "My mother." Frank's face did something then. He said, "Your mother is the problem." "What does that mean?" "It means Dwayne Pritchett is going to be the man Marsh uses, because Dwayne is already in the house, and Dwayne has the keys." I felt my hands go cold. I said, "Frank, get my mother out." "I'm trying, son. I am trying, but she has to come willing, and right now she doesn't know any of this." "Then tell her." "It's not that simple." "Then I'll tell her." "Ethan." "I'll tell her myself, Frank." He stood up. He looked down at me. He said, "If you go to that house, you don't come back." I looked up at him. I said, "If I don't go to that house, neither does she." We made a deal. It was a bad deal. Frank said so. Walter said so. Maggie said so when Frank called her at 5:30 in the morning and told her what was happening. The deal was this. Frank would station a deputy he trusted on the road outside the property. Plain car, no lights, just watching. I would walk in alone. Daylight, front door. Dwayne would not be home. Dwayne worked Saturdays at the Marsh storage facility from 7 to 1. Frank had checked. I would have 1 hour with my mother. If I was not back in the deputy's car by 10:30, Frank was coming through the door himself. I said yes. Walter said no very loudly and then said yes very quietly. Maggie packed me a brown paper bag. Inside was a thermos of coffee, 2 biscuits, and a folded white napkin. On the napkin, she had written in shaky old lady cursive, "Tell her I forgive her too." I put the napkin in my pocket. I walked up to the back porch of my mother's house at 9:14 in the morning. I knocked. I heard her footsteps inside. I heard her stop on the other side of the door. I said, "Mama, it's me." The door opened. She looked at me. I looked at her. She was older than I remembered. In 3 days, she was older. She had her hand on the doorframe. Her fingers were white from how hard she was gripping. She whispered, "Oh God, oh God." She pulled me inside. She closed the door. She locked it. She locked the deadbolt. She locked the chain. She stood with her back against the door like she was afraid the whole world was about to push through it. She said, "Baby, baby, he'll be back. He could come back." Oh God, why are you here? Why? Mama, sit down. Ethan, Mama, please sit down. I walked her to the kitchen table, the same kitchen table, the one where she had been sitting 2 days ago, crying with a photograph in her hands. I sat her down in her chair. I sat down across from her. I put my hands on the table. I said, "I know about Dad." Her whole body went still. She said very small, "What do you know?" "I know he didn't die in an accident." She closed her eyes. She put her hands flat on the table beside mine. She said, "I knew, I knew, I knew, I knew." She said it 4 times, like a prayer she had not been allowed to say out loud for 7 years. She started to cry. Not loud at all. The way a person cries when they have learned to cry without making a sound. So nobody upstairs will hear. So nobody on the other side of the wall will know. I reached across the table. I put my hand on her hand. She flinched, like she was not used to being touched gently. I left my hand there anyway. I said, "Mama, I know about Dwayne. I know about Marsh. I know about the money." "Oh God, I know you didn't choose this." "Ethan." "I know, Mama." She was shaking her head. She was shaking her head, and she was crying without sound. And she was holding on to my hand now with both of hers like I was the only solid thing in the room. She said, "I was so scared. I was so scared. The first year, after your daddy, a man came to the house. He was in a suit. He told me. He said, you have a son to think about, Coralie. He said you have a pretty boy, and pretty boys can have accidents too." She was crying harder now. I held on to her hands. "He said Dwayne was going to live with us. He said it wasn't a request. He said he was going to live with us and I was going to act normal and I was going to be a good wife. And if I made one phone call to anybody, I would lose you the way I lost your daddy." "Mama." "And I tried, baby. I tried to keep you safe. I tried to keep my mouth shut and my head down, and I tried to be invisible enough that he wouldn't notice you. And every night I prayed, and every morning I cried, and I washed my face, and I pretended I was fine. And then Dwayne started hitting you, and She broke. She broke right there at the kitchen table. I got up. I walked around the table. I knelt down on the linoleum beside her chair. I wrapped my arms around her shoulders. And I held her. I held my mother for the first time since I was 10 years old. She cried into my hoodie. She said, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I said, "Mama, stop saying sorry. Mama, stop." She kept saying it. She said it 11 more times. I said, "Mama, we have to go." She lifted her head. "What?" "We have to go. Now. There's a man outside in a car. His name is Tyler. He's a deputy. He works for Frank Donovan." "Do you remember Frank?" "Frank. Frank from—" "Yes, that Frank." Her eyes changed. A spark. Just a small one. "Frank is alive. Frank is the sheriff in the next county over. He's been waiting too. He's been waiting for us." "For us." "For us, Mama. Pack a bag. Just one. Just what you need for 2 nights. She stood up. She wiped her face with both hands. She nodded. She said 2 minutes. She was upstairs in 90 seconds. She came back down with a canvas tote bag. She had a toothbrush, a change of clothes, a picture frame, her grandmother's pearl earrings, and at the bottom a Bible with cracked black leather and her name on it in gold from her confirmation. She said, "I'm ready." We were halfway to the back door when the front door opened. I will remember that sound for the rest of my life. The front door of my mother's house, opening on a Saturday morning when it was supposed to be locked, when the man who lived in this house was supposed to be at work for 3 more hours. We froze. Dwayne Pritchett walked into the kitchen. He had his work boots on. He had a deer rifle in his right hand. He looked at my mother, then at me, then at the canvas bag. He smiled. It was the worst smile I have ever seen on a human being. He said, "Well now." My mother stepped in front of me. Dwayne raised the rifle. He pointed it at her. He said, "Coralie, move." She did not move. She said, "Dwayne, he's just a boy." "Coralie." I said, "Move." "Dwayne, he's a child." "Coralie." I felt my legs go to water. I felt my mother's hand reach behind her and find my wrist. She squeezed. She did not turn around. She did not look at me. She just squeezed my wrist. Twice. Hard. I think she was telling me to run. I think she was telling me she loved me. I think she was telling me everything she had not been able to tell me for 7 years. In one squeeze. I was about to grab her and pull her with me out the back door. I swear to you, I was. Then the back door exploded open. It did not creak open. It did not swing. It came off the hinges in one piece, and Walter Hayes came through it. He hit Dwayne low, at the knees. He was 65 years old, and he hit Dwayne Pritchett like he was a high school linebacker again. They both went down across the kitchen floor. The rifle went off. It went off. Into the ceiling. Plaster rained down on the table. My mother screamed. Frank Donovan came in 2 seconds behind Walter, pistol drawn, yelling something I could not hear because my ears were ringing from the rifle. Tyler, the deputy, came in 3 seconds after that. Dwayne was face down on the linoleum. Walter was on top of him. Walter was bleeding. I did not know it yet. I did not know it for another minute. Walter was bleeding. The rifle had not gone all the way into the ceiling. It had gone into Walter first, through his shoulder, out through the wall above the refrigerator, and then into the ceiling. He had taken the bullet for me, for my mother, for both of us. I did not understand any of this in the moment. In the moment, I was on the floor with my mother. She was on top of me. She had thrown herself across me when the rifle went off. She was shaking. She was sobbing. She was saying, "Baby, baby, baby, baby," and she was checking my face and my chest and my arms for holes. I kept saying, "Mama, I'm okay. Mama, I'm okay." And then I saw Walter. I saw the red on his flannel shirt. I saw it spread. I crawled out from under my mother. I crawled across the linoleum. Frank had Dwayne in cuffs. Tyler was on the radio. I got to Walter. I put my hand on the wound. I pressed. He looked up at me. He said, "Don't." I said, "Don't what?" "Don't make a face like that. You're going to scare me, son." I laughed. I sobbed. I did both at the same time. I said, "Walter, Walter, stay awake. Stay with me. Stay with me." He said, "Ethan, look at me." I looked at him. He said, "Your father would be so proud." I cried then. Not pretty, not quiet. The way a 17-year-old boy cries when he realizes he's about to lose the second father he just found. The ambulance got there in 9 minutes. It felt like an hour. It might have been an hour. I don't really remember. He didn't die. Walter Hayes did not die. The bullet had gone through clean. It had missed his lung. It had missed the artery. It had taken some muscle and made a mess of his shoulder, and that was all. Frank told me at the hospital. I had not been there yet. I had been at the police station in a small room with my mother telling everything we knew to a state police investigator for 3 hours, then 4. Frank came in around 2 in the afternoon. He said, "Walter's awake. He's asking for you." I stood up so fast my chair fell over. I rode to the hospital with my mother in Frank's car. I held her hand the whole way. She kept saying, "I should have left. I should have left years ago. I should have taken you and gone." I kept saying, "Mama, stop, Mama." But she kept saying it. All the way to the hospital. I think she needed to say it. I let her. When we got to Walter's room, he was sitting up. He had a butterfly clip of an IV in his arm, and his left shoulder was wrapped in white. He looked old. He looked older than I had ever seen him look. He looked up when we came in. He saw my mother. His eyes filled. He said very rough Cora Lee. She walked to the side of his bed. She took his good hand in both of hers. She said, "Walter, Walter Caldwell, I am so sorry. I am so sorry I did not call you. I am so sorry I did not look for you. He squeezed her hand. He said, "You're here now." She said, "I'm here now." I stood in the doorway with my hands in my hoodie pockets, and I watched my mother and my uncle hold hands across a hospital sheet. And I thought, that's two of them. That's two of my family back. In one day. The next 48 hours were chaos. State police arrested Victor Marsh on Sunday morning at his house. There was a photograph in the next morning's paper, Marsh in a bathrobe, a coffee mug still in his hand. The face of a man who had thought he was untouchable and had just learned that he wasn't. 3 county officials were arrested on Monday. The mayor was indicted on Tuesday. The reporter Frank had called was named Eleanor Briggs. She had been a political reporter for over 30 years. She wrote the story. It ran on Wednesday morning. Page 1. The headline was 4 words. The Carpenter's Blue Notebook. A small picture of my father ran with it. The mustache, the crinkly eyes, the man who built bookshelves on weekends. The story was 12,000 words long. I read it 5 times. The first time I cried. The second time I cried. The third time I started to feel proud. By the 5th time I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. I felt like I had a name. The trial. I want to talk about the trial because the trial is the moment I want you to remember. Not the rifle. Not the kitchen floor, not the blood on Walter's shirt. The trial. It happened that summer. I was 18 by then. I had turned 18 in May. Walter had bought me a slice of cake at Maggie's Diner, and my mother had cried at the counter, and Hazel had stuck a candle in the frosting and lit it. The trial was in late July. I had to testify. I had not slept the night before. Walter had stayed up with me until 3 in the morning. Drinking coffee at the fold-down table of the RV. We were still living in it, the 2 of us, even though Maggie had offered us the upstairs apartment for free. The RV was where my father had spoken to me. The RV felt like the safest place in the world to wait out a long night. Walter said, "What are you scared of, Ethan?" I said, "I'm scared I'll get up there and forget everything." He said, "What are you really scared of?" I thought about it for a long time. I said, "I'm scared he'll look at me. Marsh will look at me, and I'll see what he was. And I'll know that's the last thing my father saw." Walter put his coffee down. He said, "Son, your daddy did not see that man's face last. Your daddy saw a piece of road in his rearview mirror, and then he saw your mother. And then he saw you. He always saw you last." I cried at the table. Walter let me. I walked into the courtroom at 9 in the morning. The room was full. My mother was in the second row. She had a navy blue dress on. She had her hair done. She had her grandmother's pearls in her ears. Walter was beside her. Maggie was on the aisle. Hazel was beside Maggie. Frank was in the back in his uniform. And in the very last row against the back wall was a row of people I did not recognize. 8 of them. Old men and old women. I learned later who they were. They were the people whose land Victor Marsh had taken, whose grandfathers had sold for nothing, whose families had lost things they could not name. They had come. They had driven across 3 counties to come, to watch a young man in a borrowed suit get up on a witness stand and say his father's name. I sat down. I swore the oath. I looked at Victor Marsh. He was wearing a gray suit. His lawyer was beside him. He was looking at me. He was looking at me with the eyes of a man who was about to lose everything and wanted me to know that he knew it was my fault. I looked back at him. I did not flinch. I thought of my father in the green flannel shirt. I thought of the receipts on the fold-down table. I thought of Walter on the kitchen floor saying your father would be so proud. The prosecutor stood up. She said, "Please state your name for the court." I leaned into the microphone. I said Ethan Caldwell. I said it the way my father wrote it. The careful curve of the N, the little slant of the C. I said, Nathaniel Caldwell's son. The courtroom went very quiet. I testified for 2 hours. I do not remember everything I said. I remember the parts that mattered. I remember when the prosecutor asked me about my father, about the night Walter sat on his porch, about the notebook, about what my father had written for my son. I remember the prosecutor asking me to read part of the letter aloud. I remember reading it. I remember reading the line about a man is not the things he owns. I remember reading the line about stand up, son, when you're ready, when Walter says you're ready. I remember my voice not shaking. I remember looking at my mother when I finished and seeing her in the second row with one hand pressed to her mouth, nodding at me, just nodding. Over and over. Victor Marsh got 30 years. Dwayne Pritchett got 15. The mayor took a plea deal and got 8. 2 of the county commissioners served their time and one died of a heart attack in a holding cell 2 weeks after his sentencing. Sheriff Earl Brody had retired 4 years earlier and moved away. The state extradited him. He served the last 6 years of his life in a federal prison out of state. I lived in the RV for the rest of that summer. My mother moved into Maggie's upstairs apartment for a few months. She needed somewhere quiet, somewhere that wasn't the house, somewhere that wasn't full of 7 years of fear. In September, Walter and Coralie and I rented a small house on Beechwood Lane, 3 blocks from the diner. It had a screened porch and a magnolia tree in the front yard. The first night we slept there, my mother made meatloaf. I had not eaten her meatloaf in 7 years. I ate 3 pieces. She watched me eat from the other side of the table. She did not say anything. She just watched me eat, with her hand pressed to her mouth, crying again, the kind of crying that is not sad. I started at the community college that fall. I told the registrar I wanted to study social work. She looked up from her computer. She said, "What kind?" I said, "Whatever kind works with kids who don't have a place to sleep." She nodded. She typed it in. Hazel started at the same community college that same week. We took our English class together. We did our homework at Maggie's counter on Tuesday nights. In November, I asked her if she would go to a movie with me in the next town over. She said yes. She said yes before I had even finished asking. That spring, Walter and I started fixing up the RV, not to sell, to keep. We patched the rust. We replaced the windows. We fixed the heater for real this time. We painted the outside a soft sage green. Maggie said it was a color her own mother had loved. We trusted Maggie on these things by then. We installed a small commercial-grade burner inside, a refrigerator that worked, 2 big coolers. By summer, we had it ready. We named it Nate's Kitchen. Maggie made the food. Walter drove. Hazel and I rode along every Saturday. We started at the truck stop outside town at 5 in the afternoon. Then we drove to the strip of motels on the highway where the long-term residents were. Then we drove to the trailer park behind the old paper mill. Then we drove to a vacant lot near the high school where the kids hung out who didn't have anywhere else to be. We gave out hot meals, we gave out coffee, we gave out blankets in the winter. We gave out a couple of warm conversations to anybody who looked like they hadn't had one in a while. The first kid who came up to the RV was named Jordan. He was 14. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. He told us his mother had a new boyfriend who didn't want him around. I gave him a hot dog and a Coke. I sat with him on the curb behind the RV while he ate. I didn't say much. I let him eat. When he was done, he looked up at me. He said, "How do you know what to do?" I said, "I don't. I just know what it feels like when nobody does anything at all." He nodded. He came back every Saturday after that. He stopped being homeless that December. Frank's office helped us find a relative in the next county. There were 100 Jordans. There still are. About a year after the night the rifle went off in the kitchen, we went up to the cemetery. I was 18 and a half. It was September. The leaves were just starting to turn. The air smelled like apples. Walter drove. My mother sat in the passenger seat. We parked near the cemetery gate. We walked up the hill together. I had something in my hand, a piece of notebook paper folded in fourths. We stopped at my father's stone. It was a small stone, just a name. Nathaniel Caldwell, beloved husband, beloved father, beloved brother. We had added the beloved brother part the month before. Walter had paid for it. He had cried when he ordered it from the stonecutter. The man at the shop had hugged him. I knelt down in the grass. I unfolded the piece of paper. I read it out loud. Just for him. Just for me. Just for the wind in the magnolia leaves. I said, Dad, I read your letter. I did what you said. I stood up. My hands shook the whole time, but I stood up. They got him. They got all of them. Mom is here. Mom is okay. She's going to be okay. It's going to take a while, but she's going to be okay. Walter is here. He's grumpy. He's bossy. He never lets me drink the last cup of coffee. I love him. There's a girl. Her name is Hazel. You knew her dad. You let her hold the sandpaper when you built her grandmother's kitchen table. She remembers your mustache. I had to stop there for a second. I wiped my face. I kept going. I want to tell you the most important thing. I want to tell you what I learned. You said in your letter that a man isn't the things he owns, that a man is what he's willing to stand up for. And that's true. But there's more, Dad. I think there's more. A man is also the people who carry him forward after he's gone. You're still here, Dad. You're in Walter, you're in Mom, you're in Maggie, you're in Frank Donovan, who never stopped waiting. You're in a sage green RV that drives around this county every Saturday, giving out hot dogs to kids who don't have anybody. You're in me, and I'm going to make sure you stay here. I'm going to make sure you keep going. I'm going to do the work you started, not the prosecution, the other work, the quieter work, the work of seeing the people nobody else sees. I love you, Dad. I'm gonna be okay. I put the paper on the stone. I weighed it down with a small, smooth river rock my mother handed me. She had picked it up that morning at the creek behind our house. She knelt down beside me. She put her hand on the stone. She said, Nate, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I love you. Walter knelt on the other side of me. He didn't say anything. He just put his good hand on top of mine. The three of us stayed there a long time. The sun went down over the ridge. The air got cool. Eventually, Walter stood up. He said, Coralie, Maggie's expecting us for supper. My mother smiled. She wiped her face. She said, We don't want to keep Maggie waiting. We walked back down the hill to the car. I looked back once. The river rock was holding down the paper. The wind moved the magnolia leaves. My father's name was carved into stone. And I understood for the first time all the way through what it meant to be his son. We drove down the road in Walter's old truck, my mother in the middle seat, Walter at the wheel, me by the window. The headlights came on as we hit the lower road. The sky was turning purple over the mountains, and about a mile from town we passed a sage green RV parked beside the highway with a small line of people in front of it. Steam coming from the kitchen window, Hazel inside in an apron, smiling at a kid who couldn't have been older than 10. Walter slowed down. He honked twice. Light. Quick. Hazel looked up. She waved. We waved back. Walter drove on. My mother put her hand on my knee. She said, Your dad would have loved this. I said, Mama, yes, baby. He does love this. She squeezed my knee. She did not say anything else. She did not have to. The truck moved through the soft purple evening, and somewhere behind us in the warm yellow light of an RV parked on the shoulder of the highway, a hungry kid was being handed a hot meal by a girl with laugh lines just starting to form around her eyes. And somewhere underneath all of it, underneath the road, underneath the mountains, underneath everything, a man in a green flannel shirt was smiling. He always smiled. It crinkled his eyes.